Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Britain's top diplomat to the European Union has resigned. Sir Ivan Rogers leaves his job just weeks before the government is due to kick off formal Brexit talks. Sir Ivan found himself at the centre of a political storm recently when he told ministers a trade deal could take up to 10 years. Leave campaigners accused him of being unduly pessimistic, while others said he was simply reporting sentiment in Brussels. Carol Walker's in Downing Street for us now. Carol.
Thank you. Well, Sir Ivan Rogers' resignation caught Downing Street and the Foreign Office by surprise. He was due to be our man at the EU until November to see through the first opening phase of those crucial Brexit negotiations. But not everyone is disappointed at his departure. Behind the darkened windows, at the Prime Minister's side as she arrived at last month's EU summit, Sir Ivan Rogers tried to keep a low profile. But his warning that it could take the UK 10 years to get a new EU trade deal overshadowed what was already a difficult occasion for Theresa May. Sir Ivan was one of Britain's most experienced negotiators. He was a key member of David Cameron's team when the former Prime Minister tried to get agreement on a new relationship with the EU before the referendum. And some who've worked with Sir Ivan believe his departure is a real loss to the government.
The only way we're going to deliver a successful, workable Brexit is precisely with the expertise of people like Ivan Rogers, who's now been forced to the margins, forced to the sidelines, because of the angry zeal of Brexiteers who just won't accept anyone who says anything different to what they so happen to believe in.
But leading Brexit campaigners are delighted he's gone.
Sir Ivan is part of the establishment that frankly haven't accepted the referendum result and are hoping that frankly it will never happen. And I'm sorry to say, but the Foreign Office is stuffed full of these people from top to bottom. For decades they've been taking Britain in the completely wrong direction, and I hope Sir Ivan's departure is followed by many, many more.
In her New Year's message, the Prime Minister stressed her commitment to getting a Brexit deal that works for everyone.
For we have made a momentous decision and set ourselves on a new direction.
And whoever takes over as the UK representative to the EU will play a critical role.
It's important that we have someone in the job, as Sir Ivan was doing, and no doubt his successor will do as well, who will report back to the British government and through the government to Parliament about what the other member states are saying and thinking, because in a negotiation it really pays to know where the other side is coming from.
Theresa May has said she'll trigger Article 50 by the end of March, and the official line is that Sir Ivan Rogers has decided to leave now, so a new appointment can be made before the start of those formal negotiations for Britain's departure from the EU. Now, whilst Downing Street is determined to convey a positive Brexit message, sources who know Sir Ivan well and know Brussels well are concerned that his warning simply didn't fit that narrative, so were dismissed out of hand. And they're concerned that it will be very difficult to find a replacement who knows Europe as well as he did and is prepared to carry through those negotiations to get the sort of deal that Downing Street wants, but whilst dealing with those EU leaders.
All right, Carol, thank you very much. Well, let's get some more on this from our Europe correspondent, Damien Grammaticus, who joins us from Brussels. Damien, most of us wouldn't have heard of Sir Ivan Rogers or indeed the job he was doing. Just how important a role was it? Is it?
George, it was very important, and it will be even more so when those Brexit negotiations begin, because the ambassador here is not just an ambassador who hosts dinner parties. The way things work in this town, when the EU has to agree something, the ambassadors from the 28 countries sit around a table, thrash out the issues, and then the ministers and leaders arrive here to sign off on the final agreements. So losing Sir Ivan at this stage leaves a big hole. Now, he had spent the last 3 years here doing exactly that, doing David Cameron's renegotiation. So his supporters would say that he would know what is politically possible for the UK to achieve. What you've heard the other side say is that what the UK needs is an optimist. But in this town, the talk about it taking possibly 10 years to achieve a trade deal was well known before the referendum. The UK government had said so itself, so there was no surprise about that. But this does leave now Theresa May with only a few weeks to find a replacement who knows that they will be in the spotlight, they will be scrutinised, and will be having to take on those Brexit negotiations very soon.
Damien, thank you very much.
Sir Ivan had warned ministers it would take much longer to get a good exit deal than Theresa May had hoped for. Nigel Farage said he was glad to see the back of him and offered to take on the job himself. Our Europe editor James Mates reports.
A man who operated behind the scenes, rarely ever seen in public except walking in the footsteps of his political masters. But British diplomats who understand Brussels and the EU better than Sir Ivan Rogers, there are few, if any. In less than 3 months, British officials are going to start work in Brussels on perhaps the most important deal this country will have negotiated since 1945. They will now do so without Sir Ivan's expertise.
We have now an emerging pattern in which judges were condemned as enemies of the people just for doing their job. Michael Gove says that, experts shouldn't be listened to. Theresa May said anyone who doesn't agree with Brexit is a sort of citizen of nowhere. And now we have Britain's most senior official in Brussels being pushed to the sidelines as well. And that is a very bad trend in my view.
Good afternoon.
Yes. Sir Ivan had led David Cameron's attempt to renegotiate our relationship with Europe before the referendum. That, though, earned him nothing but contempt from Leave campaigners.
Well, he was a fanatical Remainer. He helped negotiate that very poor deal on behalf of David Cameron. He should have gone the day after the referendum result. He's gone now. That's a good thing. It's an opportunity for the Prime Minister to put somebody in place who believes in what the country voted for.
The Foreign Office gave no reason for the resignation, but Sir Ivan was known for telling it straight, even if politicians didn't like the message. In the current atmosphere, that may not have gone down well.
Particularly in this crucial job in Brussels, where we need to know what the view of the other 27 member states is going to be. And he was reporting back faithfully and honestly what he had said to him. And that is the job of a civil servant. That's what you want the person in the top job to do.
Number 10 was not expecting this resignation, and Theresa May will have to get a new ambassador in place quickly. An already daunting task for British negotiators just got a bit harder.
You say there that she needs to look for a new ambassador, but how big a blow is this for Theresa May?
It's probably fair to say that at this particular moment in British history, this was the most important man you've never heard of. Even his opponents accept that his knowledge, his expertise, his experience of Brussels was absolutely second to none, which is why when he produced that memo that got leaked saying it can take 10 years to get a free trade agreement, this wasn't a personal view of his. He was passing on what he was being told in Europe. Of course, he got monstered for it by the hard Brexit camp. And no one's saying this is why he left, but it's fairly clear that passing that message on of what we are actually likely to get realistically in any negotiation was not going down well. These negotiations are going to be tough. The people on the other side of the table are very experienced and know what they're doing. The British team is going to need to be on top of its game, and it's just lost one of its top players.
James, thank you.
He was Britain's top man in Brussels, one of the country's most experienced EU negotiators. He'd been earmarked to play a key role in this year's Brexit talks. But today, Sir Ivan Rogers stunned the political world by announcing his resignation. It's prompted one former top civil servant to accuse the government of amateurism. Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, is in Westminster. Michael.
Well, John, the circumstances surrounding Sir Ivan's resignation still aren't entirely clear. The Foreign Office in Downing Street are pointing out that he was due to step down as ambassador in November anyway, and that this resignation today merely brings that forward. He'll carry on for a few more weeks until his successor is decided, and then his successor as ambassador will be in post when we apply for Article 50 and the negotiation process starts. Sir Ivan, it's known, was deeply disappointed about the Brexit vote last year. Perhaps he didn't have the stomach to carry on conducting negotiations, which he thought could take many years. And it's also well known that many people within the Conservative Party and the higher reaches of government didn't like the pessimism that he often exuded when it came to matters European. Realism, he would no doubt say. So was he pushed or did he jump? Well, as often happens in these cases, it's probably a combination of the two. For years, Prime Ministers visiting Brussels have had Sir Ivan Rogers at their shoulder. He's been Britain's ambassador to the EU since 2013, having previously been a Downing Street advisor on Europe. He knows the corridors of Brussels better than almost anyone, having also worked in the European Commission. His surprise resignation has been met with delight by Brexiters, dismay by those committed to Europe.
It's a very unfortunate thing to have happened at this particular time, because I think you need all the continuity you can get when you are about to embark on the most complex negotiation, which the outcome of which is going to have a huge impact on the lives of every single person in this country.
The government can now appoint someone who really believes in a confident, independent United Kingdom with friendly and good trading relations with the rest of the EU. But we'll do it with verve and I hope at pace, because we certainly don't want to be hanging around discussing these things for another 10 years in the way that the outgoing ambassador suggested might happen.
Indeed, Brexiteers were angry with Sir Ivan's warning to Theresa May, leaked last month, that other EU states think a new trade deal with Britain could take 10 years to negotiate and might not get through even then.
Good afternoon.
And behind David Cameron during his talks for a better EU deal last year, some aides blamed Rogers for the insubstantial final package. Rogers was too gloomy, they thought, about what Britain might achieve. To others, he was just a professional injecting reality, and now he may not easily be replaced.
First problem is that it leaves a vacancy at the top of the UK's official negotiating team in Brussels, the people with EU expertise. They've lost someone who knows a lot about the EU. They'll have to move quite quickly to replace him. Second problem is they'll need to find someone to replace him, and if the impression takes hold that he's been pushed out or whatever, they may find the people who actually know most about Brussels are relatively reluctant to put themselves forward for that job.
And today, the man who was the top Treasury official until last year, Lord Nicholas Macpherson, suggested the May regime may indeed have pushed Rogers out. Ivan Rogers' huge loss, he wrote in an extraordinary tweet. Can't understand willful and total destruction of EU expertise, listing other EU experts who've moved on. Amateurism, Macpherson concluded. Theresa May lacked friends when she met EU leaders in Brussels last month. Now she's lost another personal link. But Rogers' departure could bring a new toughness and clarity to the Brexit talks.
Michael Crick reporting. Well, a little earlier I spoke to the former UKIP leader Nigel Farage. I asked him why he's now calling for still more diplomats to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, no organisation has done more than to give away our democratic rights than the Foreign Office. They've been doing it for decades, and I very much hope that Sir Ivan is the first of many to go.
But if you get people to go who perhaps tell you things you don't want to know or don't want to hear, maybe you don't have the best kind of diplomats.
Well, I don't think we should have diplomats who are committed to Britain being part of the European Union, who can't accept the result, and who in a desperately negative way, as Sir Ivan did, say it could take 10 years to renegotiate a deal with the European Union. That's of no use to us at all. And frankly, he should have gone when David Cameron did the day after the referendum.
But neither you nor I know whether it might or might not take 10 years.
Well, the point is this. There is a great, big, exciting world out there. We have a Trump administration coming in a couple of weeks' time, and it looks likely that they will want to do a free trade deal with the United Kingdom. We need, under the rules, to be free of European Union to grasp those global opportunities. So far better, actually, to have no deal than to drag something out that takes forever.
So you're advocating no deal?
I'm advocating that no deal is better than where we are today, because at the moment we continue to be regulated by the European Union, we continue to pay a high membership fee, and we're banned from making our own trade deals with the rest of the world.
But if you're going to get rid of all the people that actually know how any of this stuff was ever put together, and indeed how any of it works, you're going to leave yourself in a very disabled position.
Well, no, the people who know how it was all put together are, of course, the French diplomats who were behind the original treaty. And there's no doubt that they were fiendishly clever in the way in which they did it. Look, this, in the end, is about economic pragmatism. We have a Eurozone that is struggling. In fact, I think on the edge of another crisis. We already have, the finance minister, for example, in Bavaria, saying how important for Bavaria it is that we get a common sense trade deal. Let's push as hard as we can for a common sense trade deal. And if the European Union decide to cut off their noses, to spite their faces, then so be it.
But you as a politician are free to say whatever you like, and you've just said whatever you like. But the truth of the matter is that these people are employed by essentially the Queen's government, and they have done their service and continue to do their service, and that service is surely about speaking truth to power.
Well, I'm afraid that the Foreign Office became the lead vehicle pushing for deeper European integration. And I've served for 17 years in Brussels. I've had a lot to do with the Foreign Office over those years. There's never been any attempt at neutrality. They were, frankly, a part of the problem. And I think that, marks a wonderful moment for a complete change of direction.
We're joined now from southwest London by the former Liberal Democratic leader and current Europe spokesman, Nick Clegg. Nick Clegg, what's your reading of what has happened to Sir Ivan?
Well, I think it's a pity. I've known him on and off for 20 years, and he's a rigorous and punctiliously objective civil servant with a great deal of expertise about how the European Union works. And I think it'll just make it harder for the government to get a workable Brexit deal without his kind of expertise around the table. But what worries me is actually much wider than this particular announcement today of his resignation, which is it's part of a pattern now. When the judges said something the Brexiteers didn't like, they were condemned as enemies of the people. Michael Gove condemned all experts just because they're experts. Theresa May said in her speech to their party conference that people who didn't agree with Brexit were somehow citizens of nowhere. And now senior officials are being shunted sideways as well if they don't think what apparently they should think, according to people like Nigel Farage. That worries me terribly, because our system of government has always been based on people being able to say truth to power.
But it's only 2 days ago that Mrs May suddenly raised the spectre of representing the 48% who didn't vote for Brexit. Seems funny within 48 hours then to have lost her major lieutenant.
Well, but you see, this is the problem. The Prime Minister, notwithstanding the somewhat sort of vapid words in her New Year's statement, is basically now a prisoner of some very, very hard-line Brexiteers in her party and in parts of the press, who don't just want to take the United Kingdom out of the European Union. They want to see the European Union itself demolished. And as we've just heard from Nigel Farage, they don't really care about the economic consequences for millions of families up and down this country. They're happy to drive the whole thing into a brick wall and have the most abrupt form of Brexit.
But there is a problem here,
if you are that...
There's a problem. There's a problem in addition to all that. And that is that, I mean, if you've got somebody negotiating who is wedded to the European ideal, and sure, love it or hate it, the truth is probably most British diplomats serving in Europe rather like Europe. You can see why the Brexiteers are pretty frightened of it.
Look, I totally accept you can't have someone in Sir Ivan's position who wants to sort of actively sabotage Brexit, which is the allegation made in this slightly swivel-eyed way by people like Nigel Farage and Aaron Banks and others. But there was absolutely no question of Sir Ivan doing that. Look, my experience of 5 years in government as Deputy Prime Minister was that you get good civil servants, bad civil servants. You find out that some civil servants have strong personal opinions about this or that. But all of them, and most especially, I have to say, Sir Ivan, in my experience of both working for him and then him working for me many years later, is that he understood that his personal opinions were in a sense irrelevant, because he was there as an official to put into practice the democratic mandate of the government of the day. Now, if there was any evidence of him actively sabotaging Brexit, then of course he should have gone. But what I think is much more worrying is that people like Nigel Farage, who just heard it, they in effect want to sort of purge the Whitehall of anyone who doesn't drink the kind of Brexit Kool-Aid.
That's what I want to press you on, because you were Deputy Prime Minister, you worked with these people at a very high level. Now, we've seen this tweet from Lord Macpherson, which Michael referred to in his piece. Cunliffe, Elam, Scholar, all out of the loop. These are all people who had high positions in the European Union. Then the question is raised, is Sir Jeremy Hayward next? I mean, you know, at the end of the day, he's been on deck with you European, Cameron, the lot of them, Blair, Brown. I mean, how many of these civil servants are likely to bite the dust?
Well, that's the problem. The moment you start going down this slippery slope of seeking to handpick or blackball particular officials according to what you think might be their personal prejudices or preferences, well, down that slippery slope, I think, lies perdition, because you would then, in effect, move to a sort of version of what America does, which is that you replace a whole administration according to the whims and wishes of the president in the America's case, or in our case, that of the Prime Minister.
On that
and that would
frightening
demolish
note, Nick Clegg,
at a stroke.
On that frightening note, and it's a frightening enough one, I think we'll have to leave it there. Thanks a lot for joining us from that very cold West London position.
I've been getting